As your chair, I want to help us get through everything today with respect and good thoughts and good deliberation. I'm just moving into this, and with that, we'll call the meeting to order. And I want to say that if you are a guest here and you want to speak, make sure that you do sign up in the back. Vivian, did we have anything online that we need to discuss before I read the land acknowledgement? Anything to pass out? Thank you. Thank you. It's okay. Thank you. Before we begin, we want to first offer a land acknowledgement. Please feel free to follow along on the screen as I read aloud. Metro Arts stands and holds space on the unceded and sovereign lands of the Cherokee East, Yuchi, and Shawnee peoples who have stewarded it for generations. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in the hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We acknowledge we are all standing on ancestral lands, and we honor the thousands of enslaved African peoples whose lives were physically and spiritually stolen. We pay respects to elders, past and present. Metro Arts invites you to join in our commitment in getting to know our Native communities in more meaningful ways in alignment with our rest of arts practice. Okay. Moving into public comment. As we do every month, we want to regularly hold space for anyone. So at this point, I'd like to ask if anyone has signed up for public comment.
Yes, we have 3 that have signed up. The first one is going to be Miss Terry Davis on behalf of Miss Alicia Morzik. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I will let you know when you are at your 1-minute marker, but you can go ahead and come to the mic. Your time starts now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Terry Davis. I am the personal assistant to Alicia Morozic, who has done many murals, public art commissions, private art commissions, and lots of nonprofit and community work in Nashville, Tennessee, Davidson County. So this is what I have to say today on her behalf. A fiscal agent is more work for an artist to navigate, especially given the ridiculously low budget. What procedures are in place if that fiscal agent doesn't release funds in a timely manner? Where can artists turn for help? The $5,000 flat fee for Thrive is a terrible idea. We are literally in the most expensive times of our lives, and the cost of everything is so expensive. Lowering the budget will make it almost impossible for artists to be able to provide a good project and also be able to pay themselves a living wage for the work they're doing. And you better believe that art is work. Supplies are very expensive. Time is expensive.
1 minute.
Insurance is expensive. Renting space is expensive. You're making Thrive the opposite of what it should be, what it was designed to be. Thrive is an amazing stepping stone for me and other artists to learn how to work with budgets, learn how to work with institutions, and actually be able to bring projects to life that we could never do on our own. Do you understand how life-changing 9500 was back in 2016 when I received my first Thrive grant? A community-based coloring book was created that was printed and distributed to thousands of people across Nashville with $9,500. And I could pay myself while actually doing the work and research, which was extensive, and not worry about how I was going to pay bills during that time so my kids and family didn't suffer because I was doing something important to me as an active member of this community. It was a huge success, and it's still requested today. If someone wanted to do that today, it wouldn't be possible with $5,000. We've been to other cities and states, and we see how much they give to artists and creative endeavors, and we are far behind, and now we're going even further backwards. Finally, the general operating grants are still problematic, and denying small micro-organizations from applying for Thrive is hurtful. We need operating support and program support. Thrive doesn't pay for time in the trenches and the work that comes before and after the programming. We are not rich lawyers. We are not even middle class. We don't have savings account full of money or rich donors, and we've been volunteering our time for nearly a decade as the leader of a small organization on a virtually non-existent spare time or spare dime. We are not nonprofit administrators. The executive director salary on the low end is $75,000, and we need operating funds, and small arts nonprofits need funds to actually pay staff. And finding that is a proverbial needle in a haystack. If we had real operating funds, we could hire someone, and we also have to take these operating funds and use them for programming. It's extremely difficult to continue to grow our impact without dedicated staff who can focus on the work at hand. You all want to shut us down. You want us to fail because these changes do not reflect what the community has needed and has spoken to. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time. The next person we have is Mr. Alan Fay. And again, I'll let you know when you have 1 minute.
Try to keep it under 2.
Time starts now.
My name is Alan Fay, Executive Director of the Nashville Philharmonic, a volunteer community orchestra. I didn't think I would ever come back to one of these, certainly not in the busiest month of the year, but you sent out an email at 6:21 last night letting us know that Interim Director Dr. Coleman is recommending an operating support funding formula where 43 organizations don't get any money at all. Out of the 109 organizations who have applied for funding, you're recommending that you give a flat amount to less than 2/3 rather than distributing the funds more equitably to all or even most of the organizations. Commissioner Lefkowitz presented details about the other proposal that was discussed at the community listening sessions, and instead of considering that proposal, the Grants Committee spent time talking about how inappropriate it was that she had come up with that instead of the staff. Guess what? The staff has been short-staffed for years and has an interim director, and she didn't come up with a new solution. She spent time creating a slide deck that did a great job of getting into the details of the other proposal that the staff already presented to the public and explaining data that you've had for months. But you know what the best part is? Commissioner Lefkowitz showed up to a meeting having done her homework. So let's talk about that proposal, where more organizations get less money. 3 summers ago, I sat in a grants committee meeting, and while going line by line on the proposed awards, one commissioner stopped to ask me, as a member of the community, is that $650 grant even helpful? Because yes, one organization was receiving around that amount. I responded, yes, it's small, but with an annual budget under $5,000, that's more than 10% of their budget. Give more organizations something, even if it's smaller. We understand that allows more of the arts community to be funded, and we can still use that smaller amount to make art. And that's why you should approve funding organizations with Proposal B. And yes, also individual artists via Thrive, which I haven't had time in the last 18 hours to look at. Funding more organizations and individual artists means more people get to make art, and more Nashvillians get to experience that art. We are so tired of being here and dealing with this commission. We just want to make art. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next person we have is Mr. Mark Schuler. Did I say it right?
No, but you won't be you weren't the first and you won't be the last.
All right, let me
No
get
worries,
my
it's
clock
Schlicker.
back up.
Yes.
Schlicker,
Yes.
got it. Give me 1 second. All right, I'll let you know when you're at your 1 minute marker. Your time starts now.
Thank you. My name is Mark Schlicker, as I mentioned. I am the Vice President of the Friends of the William Edmondson Home Site. I have, in previous years, received a Thrive grant as an individual to create a documentary on Cameron High School, and more recently, we have received Thrive grants for the Edmondson Home Site for our William Edmondson Arts and Culture Festival, which we believe makes a great impact on the community that is tangible for the artists and for the community. I want to co-sign, first of all, everything that Alan and Terry said, Terry on behalf of Alicia, and also echo, I'm tired. I should be this morning working on my closeout for my fiscal year 2024 conciliation grant monies and for the impending deadline for the United Way funding that we are organizationally going for to hopefully build us some capacity.
1 minute.
Because the fiscal year 25, because our festival is in October, we won't be able to access any of the funds that we may be eligible for under any of the scenarios that are being considered. So we're back to a zero budget for something that costs us $20,000 to put on. But I want to focus the remaining time on 2 things. One is murals. This proposal for murals looks to be a solution in search of a justification. I got to scroll down. It says, They are typically temporary. They may not be accessible to the public. That's true of any art. And it's no more true of murals. I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. And you still haven't solved the individuals versus micro-organizations a question regarding both organizational and Thrive grants, because if every artist has to have a fiscal sponsor, does that mean that that organization can no longer apply for organizational grants? You're creating more problems, you're not solving them. Thank you.
All right, Chair West, that concludes our public comment section.
Thank you all. Thank you for all your feedback and your insight. And thank you, Vivian. Before we move into approval of the minutes, I'd like to ask Tessa to speak on a couple of things, and then we will recognize MHRC. Thank you.
So I'm going to move out of my normal chair because this is not, advice in the middle of the meeting and commission. This is a statement that I want to make to you as your attorney and general broad legal advice. I know there's some new commissioners, so I'll introduce myself and some new public members. My name is Cesar Ortiz-Marsh. I'm an assistant Metropolitan attorney. I've been assigned to the Arts Commission my entire duration at Metro Legal, which is a little over a year and a half. And so everything that has happened with this commission since last year's July and August vote, I have been intimately involved in every aspect of it. The only part of it that I was not involved in was the production of the conciliation agreement. Each one of you should have the conciliation agreement in front of you. I printed it and provided a copy for every single commissioner. And it's being passed out right now. All right. Also in front of you is a letter from one of the signatories of that agreement, which is MHRC. As your attorney, I am asking every single one of these, every single commissioner to read the conciliation agreement. If you have questions about the agreement, please ask. Ask me. You can ask Maisie Amos, who is my senior attorney. You can ask Director Coleman. It is imperative within your job, duty, responsibility of being assigned to this commission to understand the conciliation agreement, because it is the Arts Commission, not the Arts staff, who signed this conciliation agreement. You as a commissioner, and this commission as a whole, is a party to this agreement. This agreement is a legally binding document. It is essentially a settlement that came out of a Title VI complaint from citizens of this county and of this metropolitan government. MHRC is a partner to this agreement with us. And I say us because I'm your legal counsel. There are terms of the conciliation agreement that require this commission, not the staff, to do actions and keep MHRC informed and have open and robust conversation with MHRC. I'm going to be honest with you. I've engaged in in-depth conversations with MHRC on this agreement in the past couple weeks. And it is pretty much their position, and you'll see it in the letter in front of you, that terms of this agreement have not been met and that we are working collaboratively to meet the terms of this agreement. However, I am your attorney and I make suggestions, right? That's been driven home in the past year and a half, right? Metro Legal makes suggestions. And my suggestion to you, and I'm strongly urging you, is to understand this agreement, look at the actions that this commission has taken, read the letters from MHRC, and understand that this commission needs to direct its staff in a more appropriate manner to comply with this legal obligation. It is this commission and each one of you as commissioners who are appointed by the mayor. The Metro Code gives the power to the commission and the commissioners. The powers and duties enumerated by the Metro Code is to the commission, not to the staff. I recently sent a legal opinion to the chair, the director, and I believe one other staff member regarding duties and responsibilities of commissioners under the Metro Code, and compare that to duties and responsibilities of the staff. If you'd like a copy of that, I will send it out. But it pretty much says what I've just enumerated to you, that the legal obligations of this commission are up to you as commissioners, and that we have to comply with the conciliation agreement. It is a legally binding document. If there are any questions from the commissioners about anything I just said, I'm more than willing to answer them now.
I have a few questions.
Yes,
You didn't participate at all in the preparation of this document?
I did not.
Who on the commission participated?
I can't speak to that.
I don't think I was asked, and I've been a retired chancellor for quite a while.
This commission approved this
So,
document.
It approved it. But now I'm looking and I'm seeing that failure to comply with any portion of this agreement shall be sent to the following representatives from Metro Arts, Tyler Yarbrough. Has that been done?
Yes, it was sent to Tyler. I had conversations with Tyler. Tyler has
When?
not been, excuse me, let me not interrupt you.
Has it been sent to Rita Roberts Turner?
I don't know.
Who's sending it?
I'll let MHRC answer those questions.
Excuse me. She's just basically said a very strong, I'm telling you legally what you have to do. And I am telling you that there was very little input for us as commissioners in any of this. So, yes, Metro Legal took it out of our hands, and if my recollection is correct, I was sitting in a meeting when we were getting ready to fire Daniel Singh. Metro Legal, sitting right next to me, said, before you begin to discuss anything, we have a settlement. That's when we first heard it.
Commissioner McCoy, I'm sorry to
No,
interrupt.
Don't interrupt me. I'm
Commissioner
sorry.
McCoy?
She is out of order because she's not on the agenda. And you gave her permission to speak. I need the same permission.
Please stay on the topic, because
am.
this conciliation agreement, if you think back, this was done over the past year. We all received a final copy of this, as did you.
Yes, we did.
In September, I believe. So this is
We
old
did approve
business,
it.
and if you'd like
We
to
did
discuss
approve
this
it.
in old business, we can.
But what she has been saying to us just momentarily is that we approve this, hence we are responsible for any violation. And yet, when I see that there are provisions in here which says that we are potentially in violation, there's a provision with notices for failure to comply. It doesn't say who gives it. It doesn't tell us what we're supposed to do. And the terminology that you were using appears to be very threatening, that if we don't provide everything that is requested by what is the group?
As I stated in my comments, Chancellor McCoy,
MHRC.
there has been ongoing discussions and collaboration with MHRC on the terms of the agreement. Metro Arts staff has done significant work
I know they
in the
have.
past week based on those discussions. What I am asking this commission to do is understand this agreement, understand
I
the
think
terms.
you just said you want everybody to read it, and there are some new commissioners who may or may not have even seen it until just now. So you're asking them to read a legal document, and you're telling them they have to comply with all of this, your interpretation of what's in here, and it's 11 pages. Now,
Commissioner McCoy?
No, I got something yesterday.
Commissioner McCoy, this document you're referring to, the conciliation agreement, the commission has had this for quite some time. Our legal counsel is asking that everyone be sure to read it and understand it, and how that applies to us as the governing board is what I'm understanding.
That is correct.
And we need to move forward with this
And
conversation
I
and
would think
redirect.
we would all have an opportunity to read it. I've read it, but I don't know how many of the new commissioners have read it.
Tessa? Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Tessa, so much. That is what we need, as a clarifying guide for us, not only with the conciliation agreement, which we are specifically talking about, but in our retreat and orientation, we will focus a lot more on governance and on how the commission works with the staff, vice versa. So there's no gray area there, but I really appreciate Tessa bringing this to our attention. I do want to clear up that everyone on the commission has received the conciliation agreement. Have we all read it? And everybody has? Okay, just wanted to be clear about that moving forward. Okay, thank you.
Am I allowed to make a comment? Is that, okay. There's been, I'm a new commissioner, and like, there's been no orientation. So when hearing right now what I just heard, that we're legally responsible, is a little bit intimidating because that's the first time I've ever heard that. And it makes sense. There's just been no kind of like, we were just kind of thrown in, and I've met with HRC myself personally. I actually after a meeting I guess it was in October, when Dr. Coleman asked for help for the community engagement, I reached out to her. I helped them write with the press release. I helped them come up with social media. I consulted with Chuck. I'm working hard. I think all of us are working hard, and it's, anyway, but I don't want to get stuck on this, but I just wanted to say it's a little scary to hear that what I heard because I've been working hard.
Thank you, Commissioner. And sorry.
Thank you, Tessa. I have a question about someone to determine just technically what that means. Specifically looking at page 8, when it says on or before January 6th, Metro Arts shall finalize and publish new grant policies. Do you mind just kind of explaining what that means in terms of like, what does it mean to finalize? What are the steps that need to be done?
Yeah, so this is a term that we've been discussing with MHRC with. Metro Legal recently analyzed this term and opined that to finalize and publish by January 6th, this commission needs to have passed the criteria, guidelines, and applicable allocations, and that needs to have been filed with Metro Council before that date.
It needs to be filed but not approved by that date.
That is
Metro
Metro
Council.
Legal's interpretation, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And of note, Dr. Coleman and I appeared before the Metro Council Apple Committee this week, and I had discussions with Councilmember Gadd, and we gave an update and answered any questions relevant to these guidelines, some questions related to the conciliation agreement. So there has been open and transparent conversation.
Again, thank you, Tessa, for that update. And at this point, if MHRC would like to have we have a few minutes for MHRC to touch base on what was sent out this morning. The chair is going to make an allowance for that before we go into approval of minutes, but while being considerate of time.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll be quick.
And in the future, we'll be sure to get one.
My comments and our comments have remained consistent every time we've shown. And so I'm grateful that Metro Legal reiterated today what we've been saying. This is a legal document, and it is inside of a historical context of how we got here. To understand this moment, absent the history, is to miss the entire thing. The whole thing started over the July vote and the subsequent rescinding in August. That's where the challenge is. Those issues are still unresolved, but the parties reached an agreement, which is this conciliation agreement. But it leaves really valid equity questions unanswered. But our goal was to get, first of all, was to get the artists paid. Even in that negotiation, the muralist had to be fought for. That was the last thing that was agreed to include. And so Tuesday or Monday, I think we all met. And out of that meeting, we decided to state clearly, again, I'm reminded of the August meeting where Tyler Yarborough stood in your meeting and explained this in August. And the idea that no one has paid attention to it from MHRC, which is representing the complainants and hopefully the larger arts community, it just scoops by my head. But even the misnaming of what Commissioner Lefkowitz came up with, it's not the Heather Lefkowitz's proposal. She is using the modality that was established and approved by this commission December 2022. Using your current policies that outline what equity means to you. I've not seen any other policies that have changed that. So we're acting out of that. The July 23 vote and the December 22 guidelines, which include everything that you're going to approve today, remain unchallenged. They remain unchallenged. So our thought is, again, that was part of what the agreement was about, was in that area, and they're unchallenged. And why they're not suitable and acceptable, why the idea of taking the last one in, being the muralists, and now putting them out rings loud to us. The idea of requiring greater scrutiny of this lower end that gets lesser amounts of money, 35% auditing versus 10 for larger organizations, which get larger amounts of money. These are issues that are direct at the heart of what equity is. We have, as good faith, not lodged an official breach. We could have in October. We've even had preliminary discussions about January. Even the definition around what that means, and I appreciate your question. And we're not looking to breach anything. But what we're going to do, and as you've seen from the letter that we sent from our commission, we just had our commission meeting the first Monday of the month. They want to update on this. Where is this? Where is this going? And at this point, it just seems that we just wanted to make it clear. We'll answer any questions. But I'm not understanding why the challenge criteria, which survived the challenge, that was voted on in here, 8 in favor, 3 against, 1 abstention. And now we're recreating the wheel that I think has some serious challenges that whether it's from us or whether it's from the complainants, we're trying to avoid all of that and ensure that you're set up as you move forward, that arts distribution does not return to what it was for decades. And even if you look at my last comment, if you look at the total amount of time that you all have spent talking about grants and this, overwhelmingly, it's around Thrive and those type issues. That's concerning. So, again, we're here. We've offered our help. We've even submitted some proposals, but all of those are based on criteria that you approved in December 2022 that were used in the subsequent vote of July, which we've always maintained was the right vote.
Thank you, Director Tucker, and thank you, Ashley, for all your work. I would like to ask Tessa if we need to circle back with any questions within our deliberation. Is it in procedure that I could recognize either Director Tucker or Ashley during that process?
You can recognize him as the chair.
Thank you.
Chair West, I have a clarification. Tessa, when you were making your statements just now, you spoke very clearly about what the expectation of the commission is in doing the work and getting the work done versus the work of, well, maybe not so clear to me, the work of the commission versus the work of the staff. And you spoke on having sent out information that clearly delineates what those job responsibilities are. And I want to make sure that I am understanding from what you said to mean that the commission is to, my word, not yours, dictate to staff what they are to do relative to these things, the work.
So, and I don't want to restate things. Per the Metro Code, the duties, responsibilities, and power are with the commission. Per the bylaws, the commission is to hire a director and employ staff necessarily to effectuate the policy decisions of this commission. That's the way the promulgating documents are set up. The question that I was asked and I opined on, I believe late last week, was, is it inappropriate for a commissioner to do work that is normally and through the normal course of business delegated to staff? It is not inappropriate because the Metro Code vests the power, duties, and responsibilities with the commission. However, normal course of business of the commission is that the staff does the work based on the policy set.
And the expectation, though, is that the work happens in tandem and is then carried out, voted upon, deliberated, et cetera, by the commission, but that the staff are not simply automatons that are directed by the commission without regard for or trust in their actual work expertise, et cetera, because we've hired them for that responsibility. We've hired them, the staff, because we believe that they have the capacity, the will, the expertise, et cetera, to help to carry out the work, but that we are ultimately responsible for it.
I would agree with that statement. Yes, I would agree with that statement. That is the way that this commission and most bodies within Metro government operate.
Okay. Well, thank you. I just wanted to again clarify because I agree with my fellow commissioner that there was a lot of force at that podium just now relative to what the commission is responsible for doing. And it seemed to me to leave out our belief and trust and et cetera, and the expertise of the folks that we have hired to do the work. Whether some of us were on the commission at the time that they were hired or not.
And I want to be blunt with this commission. I stepped to the podium and said the words I did and the way I did for a reason. I am essentially part of the Metro Arts staff with how integrated I am in certain aspects of it. However, I said what I said because the Metro Code leaves the responsibility of the operations of this commission and everything that falls under it, grant making, public art, et cetera, with the commission. And so if the output from the staff is not to the level it needs to be, the responsibility is with the commissioners to figure that out.
I don't at all disagree with that.
Commissioner Wade, Tessa, could you send, and again, we'll get to this in our retreat, but could you send Commissioner Wade the email about that you'd sent me about?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think that would, because that cites the code and where we are and all that. So that's, yeah. I do want to note that we are on a hard 2 o'clock today because we've got 2 commissioners and 3 actually that will be leaving directly at 2. So I want to keep us on time today as much as we can. So moving forward, I'd like to have everybody take a look at the minutes. These are the minutes with edits these would be the October minutes.
October minutes. And I just want to apologize for having to get up. We've had a printer issue, so a lot of stuff did not get printed. If you do need copies of what I sent to you all, I can get up again and I'll make sure, but we had printer issues, so I do apologize for any distractions.
Thank you. For all the edits that were requested in the last meeting, are those reflected and any other changes you see? And if not, I'd like a motion to pass the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, we need a second.
Second.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're moving into action items. I'm sorry, we need a vote on the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And do I, any opposed? No? No? Thank you. Okay, as everyone knows, there was a grants meeting prior to this meeting. So, moving into our action items and discussion. Number one, the allocation of funds, recommendation, review, and consideration. I'd like to move that over to Chair Jester if possible so we can start there, and then we'll need a grants update, which can be under grant guidelines, review, and consideration.
Thank you. The Grants and Funding Committee met last week and approved one of the two operational grants funding scenarios. I'll let our interim director talk about that. We also met this morning and approved a funding model, not approved, but excuse me, recommended a funding model for Thrive. And I can speak a little bit more about that. Interim Director Coleman, I will pass the mic over to you to talk about the Metro Arts recommendation for operational grants.
And if we can, I'd like to keep on, let's do bite by bite on this. And so, yeah. This is allocation between Thrive and operating.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So we did make a recommendation also last week that we fund Thrive at $900,000. And Interim Director Coleman, if you'd like to speak about the justification behind that, you can.
Yes. We recommended $900,000 for Thrive because the funding for Thrive last year was $908,000. That was largely due to a supplemental funding from Metro government. The previous year's funding for Thrive was $178,000. We made the decision that we could certainly not go backwards in funding, but given that we had finite resources, the allocation recommendation is $900,000 for Thrive and $2,363,000 for operating. We also saw the $900,000 as the beginning of an effort to systematically increase funding for Thrive.
So to stay on for number one, we need a motion. Can we go back to the first, please, allocation of funds? The first slide. We'll need can we go back to the first slide, please?
Go right there.
So we'll need a motion for the recommendation of the allocation of Thrive to be placed at $900,000 to match the level of funding as awarded last year.
Chair West, do we need a motion to discuss it? Okay, got it.
Is that correct, Tessa?
Yeah, you can have general discussions prior to the motion, but
okay.
to discuss the staff recommendation, it needs to be in a motion.
Let's go ahead and take a motion, and then I'll need a second, and then we'll move into discussion.
So moved.
Seconded?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Jester. Now we'll move into discussion. Thoughts on this piece alone?
So, in terms of thinking about the percentages, because I think it's helpful to not just think about flat rate, but also to think about like the percentage of the overall budget. And it, my data was that 20.6, so that would be, was allocated to Thrive last year. So this would be an increase in the percentage. how many more applicants are there this year than last in terms of number of Thrive?
There are 200, and there were under 100 last year, around 100. It's double.
Yeah. Okay, so double the number of applicants. I think I'd like to suggest that we increase the allocation percentage-wise, and that we move it to a percentage instead of a flat rate, because that helps us scale and kind of see a value. So instead of saying a flat rate, 30, 40, 50%. So I would like to suggest an increase in that amount, given the number of applicants, and as a way of just continuing to advance the work that we're trying to do. And that's what I would like to propose.
Do you have a specific percentage in mind?
In my proposal, I had 3 slides which showed different allocations. So a 70-30 model, a 70-30 model, 30% would be $978,000. A 60-40 allocation model, in which it would be for Thrive $1.3 million, and a 50-50 allocation model would be 1.6 and some change on both sides million. So I would be interested in what other commissioners thought in terms of thinking about the 70-30 or 60-40 or 50-50. I would like to hear what people said. I think this is an example of like a really important policy that I want us, that we can discuss, and that I've wanted to discuss for a while. So I'm happy to have this chance to do it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lefkowitz. Commissioner Jester?
I will add to that. So the recommendation that the Grants and Funding Committee voted on this morning for Thrive, it was lacking in the ability for the rank scoring of any of the applications over that scored over 70. And so if we take the recommendation into account and then do the math for those based on the 200 applications that we have, if we assume that 75% of those applications come back or are still eligible, that leaves $1.48 million of ask. And if we assume 60% come back and are eligible, it assumes that 1.18 million of ask is there. And so I just wanted to put those numbers out there for context based on the recommendation that we made this morning. Increasing the amount for Thrive would be a good idea.
Do you have an idea of the number? Would you agree with a percentage, or how would people feel about percentages? And then 70, 30, 60, 40, 50, 50?
I feel like this would just be my personal preference, and I'm not sure it would be based on anything solid, but I do think a percentage makes more sense, especially moving forward. I know that most of what we're doing right now is just for this year, but if there are elements that are solid and can move forward into following years, a percentage is going to fit that idea much more appropriately.
Commissioner Harden?
I guess my concern is talking about these in siloed action items, because I feel like it would impact the way that we look at operating, proposals based on how much we're going to fund operating. So I don't know if we can do that now and then kind of lead with that, or I don't know how that conversation works without getting off of this agenda item, because I feel like that'll impact the way that we discuss the next items as well.
In terms of basically upsetting the apple cart on the other side with the operating. If we start
Yeah, if
moving
we-
money
if
from
we-
one side, what does it do the other in the categories?
Right, exactly.
Because don't we
Yep,
have an
understand that.
increased number of operating grants
We do.
as well? And so if we have an increase on both ends, we still have the finite amount of money. I was simply stating that in agreement with Commissioner Harden, making a decision relative to percentages right now also then affects operating, because we also then have an increased number of operating grants as well, which is one of the reasons that I believe, at least for my vote in the grants meeting last week, was to keep it at what it is this year, because it is a protracted year, because it is a one-time thing, and then absolutely consider percentages going forward, because we have an idea of how many grants we potentially will have again next year. I don't know that we'll necessarily have any more money next year, but any decision that we make at this moment relative to increasing Thrive, it absolutely decreases the amount that we have to give for increased numbers of operating support.
Thank you, Commissioner Wade. Any other thoughts on this? My own thought is moving into fiscal year 26. We should certainly give more intentional thought about increasing this and looking at the program overall. But at this point, keeping it at 900,000, I'd like to hear any other, I'm looking at other people to have any kind of feedback.
I mean, I'm just worried that if we get into the I think the percentage idea is great moving forward, but like for today, I just feel like it could hold us up. That's just my concern.
That is mine as well, and I think that all of our intention is to move forward with this, and then we'll take this into consideration in fiscal year 26. Somebody had a question?
Chair, may I be heard?
Oh, yes, Commissioner McCoy, sorry, I didn't see you.
I would like to point out that the staff was looking at what happened last year. And if you look at the figures, there were 108 maybe Thrive recipients. And there was a total of about, it's in these figures somewhere. The reason it went up to 900 is because Metro Legal and Metro Finance stepped in and made a significant contribution to pay anyone who was a Thrive applicant to be fully funded. That's where we got to the figure of 900,000. Before that, Thrive had been a small part of Metro Arts. It hadn't consumed. When I came on, it had been 15 applicants. That's been like 2 or 3 years ago. And they were getting 10,000, and then it boosted to 20,000.
Commissioner McCoy, I don't mean to interrupt, but just to stay on the
Right.
action item on the
I
agenda.
concur with you. I think the history is 900,000 is an anomaly. It
Do
happened.
you mean with the increase from our average of 200,000 that we'd held for a long time, when the commission would set aside the dollar amount, and then quarterly the Thrive projects would be reviewed and awarded? And you're speaking of the jump from 200 to 900,000. Understood, but right now I understand that. Do
and
you
I
have
agree with you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other conversation?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Commissioner, you?
Again, apologize for my voice. But, well, as an artist and as also part of a nonprofit organization, Thrive was something new for me. And we're always, organizations and artists are trying to find a way to express ourselves and help others. And it's a little bit hard for me to understand the percentages, and I guess probably is when they go through the review, each applicant, right? But I think Thrive also, I agree with my colleague, there needs to be equal or an increase, because what we want is to resolve that problem where not, or people saying that we are not equal. We're trying to have equity. We want to be fair. And I think people also need to see how much we work. I'm a new commissioner, but I've been part of organizations and a Metro Arts Commission and Tennessee Arts Commission as a panelist. And I try to advocate for those micro, small organizations and artists. Why? Because I work with big organizations and they usually get big grants, but they are not fair with the artists. So that is part of what I would like to share with you. But I agree that I would like to see an increase with the Thrive part to also show the community, the public, that we're working for them.
Thank you for your insight. I appreciate that. Commissioner Harden, what you were saying about how visiting this perhaps at the end of the agenda, the allocation, is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, I guess. My concern is that if we approve this as it is, we can't go back to it, and some of the discussion we have around operating grants and Thrive might be impacted and kind of. Does that make sense? But I don't know if we can discuss other things on the agenda and then come back to this, or
that would be a question for Tessa. And I guess my thought is I guess this could clear up something, and because this may be an example. So with Thrive-like projects, there was the proposal of funding all projects, and then there was the funding. Then there was a difference. So I see how that $900,000 could be affected in the terms of who gets funded if there are two different proposals going forward, or what the recommendation was from the grants committee. So, Tessa.
You currently have a motion on the table, and so that motion needs to be withdrawn, actioned or withdrawn. You as chair, you can defer this action item to the end of the agenda after that, but you do have a motion on the table that needs to be addressed.
In that case, let's defer this to the end of the agenda and take
So you have a motion. The motion on the floor needs to be actioned in some way, whether it's the motion is withdrawn or the motion is actioned on via vote.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Do I need to second that?
Please.
Second.
Thank you, and we'll put this on the heel. So going into grant guidelines, review, and consideration, we're going to take this in two parts. Operating support grants, these are action items. So on this, we have the criteria to vote on. So let's talk about policy just for a minute, okay? On policy, when we vote on policy, we've got to think policy, justification, also implementation, how this is being seen through. So when we, as the commission, kind of touch on what Commissioner Wade was saying, and we are responsible as a body for the policies that come out of this. So I want us all to think beginning, middle, end as we go through these conversations. So moving forward with operating grants, action items, criteria, review, and consideration. From my understanding, Tessa will go through these. We will, as a commission, go through these and vote, make motions, and then discuss and then vote on criteria, then guidelines, then scenarios. Is that correct? I just want to be clear for everybody.
Yes, so it's there's recommendations within each of these categories. There's staff recommendations in the guidelines. You can vote on up or down on each one of those recommendations, or you can have a motion that encompasses the yes or no to each of the guidelines. Mm-hmm.
Let's move forward with the criteria review and consideration and the first action item. I'm not sure if we don't have anyone to speak on this. My run of show is not correct. I need to get my computer out, I think, is probably the
I
best
have a
thing.
question because there were recommendations that came from the grants committee in addition to the allocation, and I was wondering when we're going to act on those and how they differ from what we're talking about now.
What I'd like to ask legal is we don't have so normally we'd have a grants report coming in at this point prior to what we're doing now. That is not on the agenda because the grants meeting was set after this agenda was created. So how do we do that?
So I believe this presentation shows the recommendation regarding operating grants that came from committee.
Updated from this morning.
Well, operating grants were decided
From the last one.
Last week at grants committee. And then there should be a slide that shows the recommendation that came from the committee regarding Thrive. So you don't have a true report, but you have written recommendations from committee.
Okay, great. Presenting this, Chair Jester, do you want to present this or Director Coleman? Because I understand Sydney's out sick today, correct?
I'm very confused. The expectation was that we would be voting on the three things that were passed last week: funding, consideration for Thrive, and operating. And then we went through in the committee this morning with the specific recommendations, and also there was a chart that said what the policy implications were. So what we discussed this morning was the staff had recommended that there would be a removal of nonprofit organizations for funding for Thrive. After discussion with the and review of many materials, legal, MHRC, we are withdrawing that recommendation. So now, nonprofit organizations, as has been the case in the past, will be eligible for Thrive funding. That makes it simple because they've already submitted and we're not taking anything away. And that was one thing that needed action.
Yeah, we're right now we're discussing operating grants.
I'm sorry. Well, we had no different recommendations other than we should follow, and I guess it is, we follow the guidelines from 2022 that were approved. Those are the recommendations with regard to operating grants.
Can we just, sorry, I don't mean to, can I speak?
No, please.
Can we just have a brief overview for everybody, just kind of what was decided last week, just so we can all have that kind of presentation? I know we don't maybe have time for like the full presentations, but maybe if we could just kind of go over, and I know you were kind of briefly summarizing, but maybe if we could just walk through it as efficiently as possible with the time constraints, and then we can like discuss and then vote.
Okay, the procedure is that we had recommended some changes, and now we're saying that we're not recommending any changes in the operating grants. The grants will be submitted. They have been submitted. They've been in the queue, as it were. We will have to select panelists to review them. First, the staff will do a technical review. Then they will be reviewed by panelists. They will be scored and ranked, and then that has to come to the commission. So that's very much abbreviated of how the procedure works. And we're not making any changes in that. Does that answer your question or give you an overview?
Yeah. No, I just want us to make sure we're going through everything.
Okay.
Because a lot of it, people, I've watched some of the meetings, but I know a lot of us haven't had that full discussion about operating grants. So I'm just trying to, work step line by line and just make sure we're all on the same page. Sorry, I'm not on the mic.
Are there any questions or concerns or more information?
Commissioner Lefkowitz, did you have a question?
No, I mean, I think I'm just echoing Dr. Coleman that the criteria and the guidelines are the same. There's no changes to those. And so, yeah.
Thank you. So in the past, the staff has called for the, so with Sydney and I, so you, are you presenting everything on grants today?
I don't have any choice, unfortunately.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, then I would like to, I'm sorry. I'd like to move forward with the action item, operating support grants. I'm not seeing a slide. What are you asking? I'm sorry.
I'm not asking anything. That was the recommendation, that there were no changes and that I'm not sure what we're supposed to be voting on.
We have to take 3 votes per item. So that would be the criteria, the guidelines, and the scenario.
Okay.
So Thrive will have 3 votes.
Okay.
Operating will have 3 votes. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. So I'd like us to kind of focus in on the operating and start with, if anybody has a motion to start.
Can I also say that the conciliation agreement, just to be clear, does not require any changes, right? Or call for any changes to the criteria or guidelines. So as I see it, yeah.
That's the same way that I see it as well. Okay.
I'm going to make a motion to approve the criteria, grants criteria.
Can we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? For these, I'd like to do a roll call vote, just to be really clear on where everybody stands. So Vivian. And this is for operating. I want to restate this. This is for operating support criteria, fiscal year 25.
West,
Yes.
Hardin,
Yes.
Lefkowitz,
Yes.
Brown, McCoy, Jester,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
Knight, Kurtz,
Yes.
Dupree Love, Nichols Phillips, Rosenblum,
Yes.
Wade,
Yes.
Watts, you.
Yes.
It passes.
Motion passes. Let's move directly into operating support grants, guidelines, review, and consideration. And again, we'll be voting on each of these as an action item rather than one package.
There are no changes to the guidelines for, as a matter of fact, we have incorporated the guidelines and criteria into one package, so, and there are no changes requested for that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Can we get a motion to approve the operating support guidelines? And
So moved.
second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, we can call for a vote.
I want to let everybody know when I call the names of the people that are not here, it's just so it's on record that we have that they are not here and that they did not vote.
Thank you.
West,
Yes.
Hardin,
Yes.
Lefkowitz,
Yes.
Brown, McCoy, Jester,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
Knight, Kurtz,
Yes.
Dupree Love, Nichols Phillips, Rosenblum,
Yes.
Wade, Watts, you.
Yes.
It passes.
Thank you. The motion passes. Okay, moving into item 3 under A, consideration of funding scenario proposals. There are 2. One is A, the staff and committee funding scenario proposal review and recommendation. And the second is what is being referred as Commissioner Lefkowitz's funding scenario proposal, but as we all have learned and understood, this is the carryover from December 22. So I'd like to open this up for discussion.
The staff proposed a funding scenario in which the 5 categories, micro, small, medium, mid-size, et cetera, were allocated a specific amount, and then there would be review and ranking, and we gave the numbers, the slide with the numbers of each category that will get. So basically, in some instances, yes, correct. You'll see the larger categories. We are allocating $400,000, which is 17%, and 4 out of the 8 would get funded. Mid-size, there are 21 applicants. 10 of them would get funded at $50,000. The medium category has 13. Again, they would be funded at $50,000. The small category, $25,000, and the micro category at $12,500. We have done some more analysis and looked at the total amount requested, which is 4.2, and the allocated total based on this model, which was considered and approved and recommended by the Grants Commission. There was another model presented that represents the reflections that incorporate the guidelines from December 2022 that were not discussed because we ran out of time. And that's the model that Commissioner Lefkowitz provided some background to. There are some observations with regard to this particular model. That one of the pluses is that it has similarly sized and similarly situated organizations in the same category, and if you will, for lack of a better word, competing against one another. The other is that some of them will get more than they have gotten in the past. There are also some considerations that this is not an ideal model because it limits the number of, there are a significant number who will not be funded. We had also proposed a flat funding model that was not considered viable or considered responsive to the needs of the community nor the terms of the conciliation agreement, so that was rescinded. So this is one model, and so the second is the one that we were going to spend time discussing today because we did not get to address it at all at the last meeting. It was presented near the end, and we just ran out of time.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. So to discuss the latter option, would you like to speak on that, Commissioner Lefkowitz?
Sure. So the latter option, again, to say it again, that this, just as we did with the criteria and guidelines, right? It would be saying the same thing, that in this year, we would use the existing funding formulas that exist that went through extensive community engagement. And that's what we would do this year. And then I would say in terms of looking at other kinds of models that we want to look at, that we want to have a good, robust discussion of policy and look at history and look at all of those things, and that those could be considered in future years. But that what is on the table right now and what exists to us is a good tool, and that we can just use it. And it does scale the awards as well. So for example, just taking whatever we decide on, as the allocation, the spreadsheet that I had, the formulas are plugged in, so you can change the formulas and play with it as much as you want, and see how it would be funded at a scale. So there's no, in other words, deficit or overage or whatever. It all goes back in, and wraps around. So I do believe that this proposal, in terms of looking at, kind of strategically thinking about the conciliation agreement and that community engagement piece, I think that, we did the best we could with community engagement in this time frame, but that certainly this proposal has a lot more. And there's data. This is linked to the community engagement that was done. Additionally, I want to say, and this is not unimportant, I think, these guidelines were posted on our website up until 2 or 3 weeks ago. These applicants who submitted their applications last January submitted them looking at this. And I think it makes sense to honor that and to use it. And again, absolutely, I want and welcome and am interested in discussion of alternative ideas. And I think we do need to get creative always, right? And we want to look at how we think about competition, like kind of this idea within categories, which is a really interesting idea to me. I just think now this is before us, and this is the equitable way and the way forward right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Lefkowitz. That was a good explanation of where we are now. I'm not trying to rush anyone at all, but I would like to have any discussion and feedback on both the staff and, so just to be clear, in the grants meeting prior to today, the operating support determination and recommendation from the grants committee was the staff and committee funding scenario proposal, which is separate from this funding proposal. However, after today, we've all discussed this in the scalability. So I just want to open this up for conversation before we move into a vote. Any questions? And to touch Commissioner Harden, and then Commissioner Jester, and then Commissioner Yu.
I guess my question is around due diligence in terms of what was approved at the grants committee level and how we move forward. It sounds like what Commissioner Lefkowitz was discussing is a proposal that was not approved at grants committee level. So I'm assuming as commissioners, we can make adjustments to that action.
Correct.
Okay.
The committees provide recommendations to the commission. The commission can adopt it, reject it, modify it, or have a recommendation that's separate.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or approve a recommendation that's separate.
I have the second proposal in front of me on, I have access to that, but I'm wondering if we have visual slides that outline the next option as well, because I'm sure people are following. And
Which one is it?
yes, like I can see that myself, but I don't know if the general public can see the second option.
They are posted as well on the website under the grants tab. If you go to the grants tab, it says specially called meeting, and all of the files that Dr. Coleman sent out are there, including the spreadsheet for mine, the slide deck for, everything's up there.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Commissioner Yu?
It's a question just for clarification. In this, the operational grants, as well as Thrive organizations can apply for both?
That is a staff question.
Yes. Operating was designed for art-specific organizations. Okay. Thrive was intended for individuals. And within Thrive, however, we have had examples of groups of artists coming together to apply.
And in Thrive also is the part where the artist should find an physical agent.
That is one of the requirements so that we can get money to individual artists.
That will be under the Thrive part of the agenda. So let's try to stay on each point and then we'll move through them. I think we're just trying to get this up for the public to see. And Commissioner Jester, did you have, I think it was Commissioner Harden, Jester, you.
Yeah, I wanted to add that the Grants and Funding Committee made a vote last week, and while I want to be careful not to negate the work of a committee, because I think committee work is very important, I was disappointed at the brevity or the length of time that we had to actually go over this proposal, which I know that, well, I don't want to belabor that point, but I have gone over it at length now, and I feel like the fact that it is rooted in community engagement from the very beginning to the very end, and that's what was lacking the most in the proposal that we voted on, that I would feel comfortable after having had sufficient time to review option B to vote differently than we voted for in the Grants and Funding Committee. So I want to be careful not to negate the work of a committee. I think committee work is very important, but given the limited amount of time we had to look at that last week and the week following and having time to review it, I do feel like it is a more solid option than the one we were presented.
To echo what you said, I mean, I would also like to discuss option A more in Grants Committee meeting, like to have more time to flesh it out and to think about it, to look at the history, history, perspectives, where else is this done, what's this, all of that. So this is just a vote for today, for this fiscal year. But I think there's a way to vote and to honor the work, right, that has been done. Because we do it, I mean, I want to encourage creativity and admire, that kind of work. I think we're just talking about what will get us to where we need to be today, and then we can have more extensive discussions. I would like to about this.
Thank you. Agreed. So looking at what we have up now on the proposal and looking at the time of 1:29, we have two proposals in front of us, and I need some guidance procedurally on how we will determine which one of these we're voting on.
That'll be based on a motion.
Yeah, just the motion that's made, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So at this point, I'd like to ask if anybody has any other questions, and otherwise to make a motion.
Quickly, just to clarify, in the second model, all of the organizations scoring over 70% will be funded in some capacity. Is that correct? Okay, cool. I just wanted to. I'll make a motion to approve this.
Second.
I would make a motion to approve option B under our agenda item, consideration of funding scenario proposals for operating support grants.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Anyone against?
Should we take a roll call there?
Yeah, let's do.
Please
It's going to be
call
clear
for-
that way.
Please call for discussion on the motion.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion.
She said call for discussion.
Discussion on the motion, please.
I guess
Is there any?
I would just add too that over the course of the week, having been able to review it and then receiving community feedback about the two options, this, at least as far as my inbox is concerned, was the overwhelming favorite by people that were giving me feedback.
I would agree with that for me too. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. With that, all in favor? Are we doing roll
Are we
call?
doing roll call?
For each one? Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. West,
Yes.
Hardin,
Yes.
Lefkowitz,
Yes.
Brown, McCoy,
Abstain.
Jester,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
Knight, Kurtz,
Yes.
Dupree Love, Nichols Phillips, Rosenblum,
Yes.
Wade, Watts, you.
Yes.
Nine yeses, one abstain.
The motion passes. Thank you all. Okay, moving into Thrive at this point, 1:32 p.m. And on this, we will go through the criteria, the guidelines, A and B on fiscal agency and the staff funding proposals. Please keep in mind this morning, the grants committee did meet and there is a recommendation from the grants committee. So without that being on agenda, I'd like to call on Chair Jester to review the recommendation from the committee.
Yeah, you can hand it out. Yeah.
Do we have handouts?
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to hand it out.
Recommendation.
Thank you.
So a quick synopsis of the recommendation, because I don't think it's available for a slide, is that we recommended to adopt Thrive award criteria that include a $10,000 flat funding model, applications that score 70 or higher would be eligible, applicants applying for less than $10,000 would be funded at the full ask. Applications applying for more than $10,000 would be funded at $10,000. We recommended that we allow 501c3 organizations and artist collectives to be included in the opportunity to apply for Thrive. That we allow Thrive recipients to also be fiscal agents if they qualify. To allow community public art projects. To limit Thrive audits to a total of 10%, so it's in line with operating grant guidelines, and to approve other additional Metro Art staff recommendations, which, Tessa, would you mind reading off what those other recommendations were, because I don't have those written down in front of me.
I believe that they're on the slide.
They weren't on what I wrote
thank
for
you.
myself.
The bottom.
Thank you. So the additional Metro Art staff recommendations were allowing murals as eligible projects, that there would only be one submission per applicant, that background checks would be required for youth engaging projects, priority funding for underrepresented council districts, and use of fiscal agents for payments.
Thank you, Commissioner Jester.
I would say that the one issue that we should probably talk about with this recommendation is that, based on what I said earlier, we still run into a problem of running out of money. And so what we did not address is how we rank order the applications that were scored at 70 or higher, because if, based on some quick math, if 75% of the applications come back, that's a total ask of 1.48 million. We don't know how many of those are going to be approved or really this is all basically hypothetical because we don't have the information we need about the applications. But based on the number we have now, if 75% came back, we have 1.48 million. If 60% came back, we have a total ask of 1.186 million. And so there would be the need to rank order the eligible apps in order to be fair and equitable.
I'm seeing Commissioner Harden and then Commissioner Yu. Commissioner Harden?
My question is about prioritizing funding for underrepresented council districts and how that will impact scores. Is there I understand that that's a good thing to read. I'm trying to understand how it might work.
We
and how
have
that works.
approximately 7 council districts that don't have any funding for Metro Arts, and the council districts are required on the application, so it will be easy for us to determine that. But we did not do that because we didn't know we didn't have we were working from some different criteria, and so I don't know that it would. Is your concern that it would adversely impact or?
No, I'm not concerned that it's a negative impact. I guess I just want to understand how that will work. Like, how will we prioritize them, if that makes sense? Like, is there a formula, or is it in the score?
It's not a formula. It's obviously whatever the score is. It needs to be 70 or higher, and it needs to meet all the other criteria that we have. And then we would make sure that if there are underrepresented districts that meet the criteria, they would be considered.
Could it be part of the rubric?
That was exactly my question. Was part of the rubric?
It isn't at the moment, but it could be.
Yeah, that's a question that Metro Legal sent regarding this bullet point was making sure that the data underlying making sure that we have a definition of what an underrepresented council district is, and then how is it operationalized. It can be in the scoring. It can be a point in the scoring matrix. It can be operationalized many different ways. And so Metro Legal doesn't have the answer to it, but it is a question that I posed to staff.
Thank you, Tessa. That is, I think, going back again to policy. Policy we are setting, but we need to know from the staff how that is operationalized and how that's going to be implemented. So that is kind of, I think, where I'm hearing these questions kind of gel up. Is that vibe? Okay.
I will say to my question, from my time here at staff, there were a number of times where we would have these questions that come up related to action items that don't necessarily hold up the action item, but that we ask that we just have some clarity on in the future. So with that being said, I'm saying that not to hold this up, but just it would be nice to understand that in the future how that would work. So just want to say that.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner McCoy.
I would suggest that we change the wording for this year only to priority funding for council districts with no representation in our funding. I don't know how many of them are not getting any money, but asking the staff to determine what is underrepresented is a hardship given the limited amount of time that we have and the limited staff that we have. They can figure out whether some councilmanic district is getting 2 artists funded or 20 artists funded. But I don't think they have that information readily at hand. Andy, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Yu, then Commissioner Lefkowitz.
Thank you. I have a question. In regards of the physical agents, I still don't understand if they're going to be a percentage of the grant for managing the grants or administrative money is going to be granted to them, or they're going to be taking a percentage for managing and representing the artists.
We will get down to the fiscal agent, but just so you know, as it sits currently, the fiscal agent can take up to 10% agreed upon between the artist and the fiscal agent. The fiscal agent will be a 501c3. not necessarily arts related, a 501c3 that can carry that proposal together moving forward up to 10%. I also have questions about the 0% versus 10%. There's some equity there and then alignment within genre, but we can get to that once we get to the fiscal aid. Does that help? Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question about the flat funding amount of $10,000. And I guess I'm wondering more about how you landed on that figure, but also I'm wondering if there was a consideration for perhaps funding projects just at a certain percentage, right? And then, not everyone who applies for a grant will get it, right? But if the applications were scored in such a way that essentially we give the money away till it runs out, and as opposed to a flat funding model, I'm just wondering about that, if there was consideration about that, because some projects, as we kind of you all talked about in that last grants meeting, depending on the scope and scale of the project, that could be helpful or not. So it's almost like funding the highest scoring projects at fully or at part of what they requested, and then we're out of money. I don't know if, like the discussion of the flat funding model. Sorry, I went off.
There was consideration given to funding everybody, and that amount came to $5,000 and went all the way down to under $1,000, and that model was rejected. We also looked around the state to see where there were examples of funding of individual artists, and we found 2, and that amount was $5,000. We then went and looked at the southeastern region in terms of South Arts, and there were a few states that did give funding to individual artists, and that range was $2,000 to $7,500. We also looked nationally, and the amounts were much larger in the few instances where they existed in terms of funding for individual artists. Most of them were very, very competitive for nationally and internationally known artists. So since we had $10,000 before and we had $20,000, we settled on $10,000 as being larger than what was in the state and the region. The other factor that we took into consideration is of the 200 plus applications, approximately 153 are for $20,000. And so we would not have very much money to fund as broad a perspective as we would like. And so that's how we settled on $10,000.
Yes. I think, one of my suggestions is, the way that artists present the application needs to be very well reviewed. And I understand the writing, it's important for everybody to understand. I have seen before, and I know some of the artists who got the money, the application was not very well written. And I think we have to learn, because that is the way I learn. I think the artist also needs to be more involved with the Metro Arts, take trainings, and come to the meetings to know exactly what we're doing and the Metro staff is doing, for them to understand. And if they want to complain, they have a background saying, I know this, but we need them to be more involved with us and with us community. And I don't want them to treat them to be like a child, but they need to learn. And when they apply, I think we have to be very careful about how we send that money or grant that money to artists as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Yu. I think the 2 weeks, were you going to speak about the training for the... Go ahead. Okay, no, go ahead.
But I was
going to say something that I thought could clarify just what we were talking about too is, I mean, we are funding artists who are doing projects, right? And so these projects have budgets. The check goes to the individual artist, but it's for a project for which they submit a budget. And so that, to me, that's what I was talking about in terms of why a flat rate is more troublesome to me. I would rather see, and like, again, maybe we cannot in this climate, I'm in agreement, fully fund all of the projects. We want to say maybe we fund 70%, 75% of the budget, and then we score them, and then we give the money away until it's gone. And that, to me, is how good grant making works. And it also means that the project itself, there's more integrity to that project, right? Because it's funded at a level. So I guess for project-based stuff, that's why I personally am resistant to a flat rate, because projects are so different. And that is my thought.
I'd like to reiterate that. On the flat funding model, projects are so specifically different. From a mural to a project, if you have 5 partners in one project versus one artist working individually with 5 people. So I do think a flat funding model doesn't quite touch. I would also like us to keep in mind that the spending time allocation on when these projects can be executed, by the time the checks get to the artist, I cannot speak for finance. I don't see anybody from finance here, but I do want to keep us on track with that by the time that the artists do receive the funding, this, as far as I know, I can ask the staff, nothing is retroactive, correct, Dr. Coleman? Mm-hmm. So nothing's retroactive, unfortunately. So these projects are really going to be executed in a 2 to 3 month time frame. And I've even heard from some organizations and some artists that the $10,000 is too much to be able to. And so our legal counsel can talk us through that as well as to why that would not be the best framework. You've had a question, Commissioner Kurtz, and I'm going to call on you. Thank you.
Thank you. This is unrelated to the topic we were just talking about, but one of the questions that I had was about the audit limit of up to 10%, which is in line with what the operating grants have, is up to 10%. The only question I have is not exceeding 10%. Is that into perpetuity, or is that just for this year? Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
To be just for microphone, just this year. I think everything we're recommending today is for fiscal year 25 only, and work concurrently with fiscal year 26. Commissioner Rosenblum.
I just wanted to bring up, since a community member, I believe, said that they were not for fiscal agents. Like, is that something? I don't want to hold anything up, but is that something to talk about? And also, I do agree with Commissioner McCoy about no funding versus priority, just to keep it simple this year.
I think I could probably answer that. So the working group was charged with the mechanism of how we fund this year to individual artists. So the working group has come up with this mechanism, which is the fiscal agent. And this is the mechanism that we will work with. I do have several questions as well about the fiscal agents and how they're being chosen and what have you, but unless anyone has any changes to that, to my knowledge, no, this is how we're working the policy with the working group in terms of the mechanism of funding. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Can I just add one? Well, and it's also, again, as is everything, just for this year.
Right. Yeah.
So we learn, we try, this is the best option for this year, and we go back to we hit it again next year.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Commissioner Wade.
Yes, as we ultimately determine flat funding of 10,000 or percentage, hasn't there been discussion of the opportunity for those who have applied for these grants to go back in and actually make adjustments to their proposals, which then also means that they would make adjustments potentially to the amount of money that they will either ask for or need based upon the protracted year and things of that nature. And so I think it's important that we pay attention to anytime you ask for a grant, you usually ask for 100, you probably will get 30, you will then make adjustments. And so if we are encouraging those folks who are participating, this is not a perfect by any means situation, and they do have some autonomy in, if we go with 10,000 flat funding, you don't have to take it. Certainly it's not going to be enough, but that you have some opportunities to make adjustments in what your project plan is, even recognizing how short the timing is. Just a statement.
Thank you, Commissioner Wade.
I'll also say, to follow up on that too, or to build on that, there's probably going to be a lot of attrition too, in terms of thinking about, like, artists should have the right to go back in and edit their budget and things. It's been a year, since almost a year. So that there'll probably be significant change, I would say.
So to make this motion, we can make changes, correct, within the recommendation, and then edit the motion as it sits. What I'm hearing is there is some support for the flat funding, some support not for the flat funding. So we can take this motion as it is, or Tessa, we need to take the motion as it is.
There hasn't been a motion on this.
But when the motion, how do we amend the motion?
You can make a motion that is different than the recommendation from the committee.
Chair West, since this potential motion or this recommendation from our committee doesn't include a way to score the applications above 70%, if we were to vote on this and then approve it, are we still left in a problem with a policy problem that we're leaving for staff instead of taking care of ourselves?
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah, that is problematic. Repeat my question? If we were to make a motion and vote on this recommendation that the Grants and Funding Committee made this morning, because this recommendation doesn't have a mechanism to score the applications that were scored above 70%, and there's not enough money to cover, most likely, almost assuredly, there's not enough money to cover all the apps that score at higher than 70%, then we're going to be either leaving the staff with something that should be a policy decision that we choose, or we haven't done what we need to do to give a complete recommendation to our staff.
Thoughts on how to rectify that from the Grants Committee perspective?
I mean, it sounds like we would have to come back with an alternative funding mechanism. Am I hearing that correctly? I mean, I'm not, obviously, we're not trying to do that, but
I'm not. I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know if we make this recommendation and it's not complete. I think it's not right of us to leave that out and to expect that it's going to be a staff problem to solve. So, I mean, I think maybe, yeah, or we need to go ahead and consider a different recommendation here in this forum.
And you're specifically talking about number one on the flat funding model part?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you mean, well, this whole recommendation that the Grants Committee just made, all of it's great except for the fact that there's going to be more applications that score at 70% than we have money for, and to make that fair and equitable, we have to be able to rank order those. So you have applications at the top and applications at the bottom, and there's a cutoff line, and there's no mechanism in this recommendation for ranking those apps that score higher than 70%.
Commissioner Wade?
Is there any precedent anywhere in Metro Arts history of an existing ranking model that we could utilize again just for this year so that we could have a ranking model to utilize for these Thrive grants? Is there not one in operating? Because we are not giving away all of, every person is potentially not funded in that situation. So shouldn't there already be some ranking mechanism that has been used at Metro Arts before that could be used at this time?
As not being a staff member, I can't answer that. Now, being a commissioner for so long, there have been mechanisms in place, but yeah, it's how we've always done that. That's how prior to 22, that's how it was done, I believe.
Is there a reason that we wouldn't or shouldn't utilize that for this year? That same
I
mechanism?
haven't looked at that in a while. I guess my understanding is that the reason that we're relooking at Thrive is for legal reasons that are not related to that, if I'm correct, not related to how they were ranked in the past. So can we still adopt that's, and I don't know what that is, but I don't know if anyone can speak to exactly what that ranking system was, but.
Madam Chair, may I speak? I think if we modify...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. It's 3 minutes until 2, so I want to make sure we need to check quorum, because if we're losing 2, where do we sit?
We're at 8.
At 8, so we still have quorum. If anyone abstains on a vote, we will not have quorum. Is that correct?
My beautiful bride has given me 30 more minutes, so.
Thank you, Marissa. Okay, thank you. Commissioner McCoy.
I would suggest the wording be all applications scoring 70 or higher will be eligible, and funding shall be awarded based on the highest scores until funds are exhausted. You don't rank them. Whoever scores highest gets funded until you run out of money.
I think the concern is that the guidelines are broad enough that there are going to be a lot of applications that come back with the exact same scoring number.
The only time you have a problem is when you have a number at 72 or 74, whatever that particular number is. And if you have an alternative, I'm for listening.
Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on what I was going to say. But yeah, as far as, oh my God, I'm sorry. I totally lost my thought. But it was
happens to me.
I know.
We can circle back to you.
Okay, circle back.
We can circle back.
Yeah.
Well, to the previous discussion about council districts or projects that are not, could that also be added to the rubric, right? And so you add things to the rubric, right? Such as that. And I would say if we're going to add things, that they be things like that, right? In order to perhaps make it easier to rank.
Commissioner, you?
Yes, I remember a long time ago when other organizations applied, and I was part of them. And as a panelist, they had a guideline where all of the panelists were checking how was written, or the good explanation, and also how they had a guidelines, but I don't remember all of that.
We have that to vote on today.
Okay.
Yes, we sure do that. That would have been in your packet, and so that was 2 pieces. It's the panelist review, and then so those 2. Yeah, exactly. Commissioner Rosenbluth.
I remember what I was going to say. From my understanding, we don't have a screening. We don't have a panel of screeners or panelists so that also probably needs to be addressed, or.
There is a panel, yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
In our agenda under, let's see, at the bottom, number C, panelist criteria for review and consideration, that action item. So we still have 2 big action items to get through, and then to circle back up to allocation.
Okay.
Yeah. And
There's no way to your point, Commissioner Jester, vote to approve something with like, we're going to work on the rubric. We have to approve the rubric too, right? Yeah. So we can't vote on it until that is clear. The mechanism, you know, like for the ranking.
If there's outstanding policy decisions that need to be decided on, it can't go to council. It needs to be the complete plan to go to council. And if there's factors that don't complete the plan, that will be an issue.
Am I also hearing that, did I hear correctly, that there is already in place a way that we could rank these that already exists? So could we just not add to this that we use the ranking system already in place?
There are guidelines in place. Yeah. So I don't think I'm clear on your question. I'm sorry.
I think it's your point that though that might not distinguish it enough, right? That there might not be as much that rubric is too simple. And so therefore, if it's not detailed, everybody's going to get an A, which all my students got an A. No, you know, and do you know what I'm saying? Like that might be the thing.
I'm going to just give an example of how this problem could be solved. Is essentially if applications, it could be the policy of this commission that you guys make today, that if applications, there's 10 applications that all have a score of 75, the policy could be there's an additional review done on those applications to rank order those applications, such as a curved grading scale. But that's just...
So we can take the recommendation from the committee and add to that with the language you just said. Or amend it. Amend it.
That is not a legal recommendation. I was just giving that as an example.
An example
to the commission on how you guys can develop policy to solve this problem.
Yes. I think I do too. Yeah. So to that end, we need we need a policy motion to be put forward. And Commissioner Harden is going to take over as chair for about 5 minutes. Is that okay with legal? While I step out and take medication and come back in? Or does that halt the meeting?
We have quorum. If the chair needs to leave, the bylaws are the vice chair will chair the meeting.
Thank you.
So to continue the discussion, it sounds like we need to discuss a motion that will include include a creative solution to dealing with the flat funding model. I think Tessa provided an example of how we might be able to do that, but if anyone has any other ideas to discuss how to accomplish that, we can discuss it now. And I do think that was a good idea. Tessa, I know you were just giving an example, but it was a good example.
I think Tessa's not legal thought was a good idea. I think it would work well as long as the people who originally scored the apps that all scored the same. Let me back up and say this again. The second perusing of the apps that scored the same would need to be by different people than scored the first time. I think that's important because I think it would be pretty easy to know who you were talking about when you went to rescore the apps for the second time. Commissioner Lefkowitz.
Gotcha.
It looked like that was, did I cause questions? I just think that there's a good possibility that if the same person went to score an app a second time, they would know that they'd already scored that app, and it could create some bias. Or so just having somebody else score the app the second time than the person that scored it the first time would be important.
And I guess my thought, maybe this is also where discussing specifically projects in underrepresented council districts or non-represented council districts, that could be maybe the first step. Is that, you know, I don't know how you all feel about that, but even before we even get, if everyone has the same score, we look at where are these projects, and immediately if there's a project where it's in a council district that has no representation, then that bumps them up. And then if we go into another round, I'm just throwing this out as an idea, then we have someone else look at the scores and kind of go from there. Just throwing that out. I don't know if there are any thoughts.
I think that's a great idea. I mean,
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that as well. So if we were to make a motion concerning what we're talking about right now, it would include our recommendation from this morning, making the amendment that we would include non-represented council districts and then a rescoring of applications if they scored the same.
That sounds like where we're headed. I guess my question is still, which funding model does this, we have to adopt a funding model even with this, correct?
Well, if we're using the recommendation from the Grants and Funding Committee this morning, it is a flat
Okay, so this
$10,000 funding model.
Okay, including the flat funding model.
Yeah. Well, I'll make that motion. So I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the Grants and Funding Committee as reads on the screen with the amendment that we prioritize council districts with no representation, and ultimately that if there are multiple apps with the same score keeping us from being able to fund, that we re-score those apps with new panelists.
Is there a second so we can discuss?
Second.
Now opening the motion for discussion. I still feel like there's some questions that I have about the scoring, and even allocating between what, I think being very clear about council districts, I think is important, because you could have a situation where you have a $10,000 project in one council district and then a $1,000 project, and it's not necessarily equitable by counting. So I'm wondering if there's a way, and I know that that's like a whole nother formula that we need to think about, but just thinking about equity, tallying is not necessarily the best way to go about that. And I'm just wondering if there's another piece of language that we can use to emphasize that. And I will hand the chair responsibilities back over to Campbell. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Harden. Sorry for the interruption.
Is it something that it could be, to Tessa's suggestion, in terms of thinking about the discussion of underrepresented council districts or number of projects? I feel like as well, there's also probably some resources on Metro. Like, I took a look at all the maps and stuff trying to figure out. I feel like there's some ways, there's some discussion that could happen. And so could that be part of the developing the mechanism, for whatever, even though, I guess it is slightly different, but I think we don't know enough right now, to your point, to kind of get that right, but that we want to do something with that and include it, which I'm into that. But I didn't know if there's a way to,
The grant application asks for your councilmanic district. It's on there. That's why we were able to say that there's 7 or 8. I particularly like Commissioner McCoy's underrepresented perhaps is too vague. We're talking about that have not been previously funded, that have no Metro Arts funded projects in them.
Commissioner Wade?
A couple of questions. The motion that we just heard, what kind of time and cost is included in the potential rescoring, right? So we have to get more panelists. That means more time. What potentially does that look like? And so this is for later, because I don't expect anybody to know that answer. But it's going to cost us more. It's going to cost us much more time trying to find new panelists, et cetera, which means we potentially run into a wall. And then who and how is the curve decided? More time. And this may go to what Dr. Coleman was just saying, but I was formulating my question, so I may be repeating. But do we even know how many applications there are in each of the underrepresented council districts and how much those are asking for? And so are we, as we are brainstorming these ideas, adding much more time that runs us into difficulty in meeting what we need to do?
I would, I guess in response to additional panelists, I, in the past, like for example, with some of the public art projects that have come through Thrive, we've had public art staff members review those applications from that public art lens. So when you're getting those, it's like if it's a mural project, as a public art staff, we're reviewing the application and this is not necessarily always the score, but providing feedback to, things that from a public art expertise might help the application or, so I'm wondering if we could call in staff to be a part of that review of the second review instead of calling in more panelists. Yeah, because there is an expertise of staff in these areas.
There's precedent for that.
I don't disagree with that. My concern was who and where do we find these new people who were not staff? And then another question that also just popped into my head. When we apply for MDHA funding, they tell us what score is possible based upon whatever the question is on when we're applying for that grant. Is it possible, as we look at this councilmanic district piece, that they get a specific score, a specific amount of points added to their score simply because they are from that district, so that we potentially, they just get a higher score. They get 5 extra points, like an AP score, you get 3 extra points because you're in an AP class. I don't know if that is possible, but.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to be rescored.
I think there was some conversation about how meeting some of these would increase your score. I'm not sure if staff has anything to touch on that or if that discussion.
There hasn't been much discussion. There was discussion as to whether or not, and it wasn't a formal discussion. There was conversation that if you are a fiscal agent, should you get extra points for that? And it was just very, very informal. There's not been formal discussion about possibilities of extra points at this time, but that's something we obviously have to consider.
Okay, so at this point, we are still discussing the Thrive criteria review and consideration. Correct?
There's a.
Is there a motion? I'm sorry, while I was out, can somebody catch me up, Tessa? Or
We had a motion. We were brainstorming about ways to deal with, the next tiers of review, given that an organization is tied in score. We talked about the first tier being looking at underrepresented council districts, and then tier 2 was to rescore those applications that are in in this with the same score. If they have the same score and the same council district, then the next tier would be to rescore them. So that was the motion that we put on the table so we could discuss, and that's what we're discussing.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion as it is on the floor currently?
I like the idea of adding points if you're in a non-represented district. I don't think that solves the question that Commissioner Hardin had, though, about not just about it not being equitably from a funding perspective.
Yeah, I'm bringing these things up because I'm thinking about them, but I find it hard to see how we can determine that today. Yeah. And I'm thinking about CARE, I'm thinking about the next fiscal year and those processes, but I just don't know if we can, but I think it's good to think about these things, but I don't know if we have time to do that right now.
And I think that, to your point about CARE, is a great role for CARE, and what, when we get to it after January about what happens next, that is exactly the kind of work,
I'd like to make the recommendation that does get rolled into CARE work, and that we can apply that towards our fiscal year 26 planning, because CARE should be reviewing all of this going through. That should be part of the process. It is part of the process. In this timeline currently, it was unavailable, and so that is something that could be moved into CARE.
Yeah,
coming out. Okay. But for today, we still have to approve this criteria as it sits, the motion that is on the floor. So, any further discussion?
Well, I think we probably do need to amend the motion. I think I wanted to make the motion so we could start to have that discussion.
Since you made the motion, do you want to amend it?
I made the motion, but what's your recommendation for the amendment?
I think we should be clear about what to do about underrepresented artists right now. And if it's just to tally, I think we just need to make that clear in the motion. And that I think we're on the same page. I just think it needs to be crystal clear. And I think that we're in sorry, I didn't mean artists. I meant council districts.
Okay. You said that we wanted to clarify by saying not funded.
Yes, no underrepresentation versus no representation. I think that's the first thing we need to clarify. And I guess I'm fumbling over words, but I'm talking about the same thing. I'm talking about underrepresented council districts in funding for Metro Arts. So I think, how do we determine?
May I be heard on that?
Are we specifically talking about Thrive projects or? Okay, and that's what
What's on the floor right now is regarding Thrive.
I would suggest priority funding for council districts with no Metro Arts grantee constituents. That means they have no constituents in their council.
While I agree with you, I'm concerned about not having the data readily available to us right now, making a policy decision on data that we don't have that's current, unless I'm understanding differently.
So I'm sorry, I'm trying to clarify with that statement. Are we saying in these applications that we have right now for Thrive, we're counting the tally of which council districts are represented for Thrive projects only? Or are we talking about all funding related to Metro Arts? Does this go outside into public art projects, other programming, or is this specifically looking at within this application, these are the districts that are funded and these are the districts that are not?
I would just change the word to Thrive grantees, that they have no Thrive grantees in those council districts.
That was the intent, that there was no grant funding, Thrive grant funding in the district, because that is on the application.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what his question is.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was mostly just a clarification of what we mean when we say underrepresented in terms of funding. And I think I'm clear that we're specifically talking about this allocation and Thrive for this fiscal year when we're looking at representation. I think that I'm clear on that now. But there are other ways that we show up in communities that are not Thrive related. So in my mind, that's what I'm considering representation as well. And I know that that's where it gets more complicated. But yeah, I think I'm clear now. And I'm willing to make a motion if we're ready for it.
It's already
Or
If you're willing to make a motion, I could rescind mine, but I think we have to address the one that's on the floor too.
We do, yeah.
Are you ready to make a motion based on our conversation? Yeah. All right, so I'll rescind my motion.
I'll withdraw my second.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the Thrive-like grants guidelines review and considerations, considering that in the event with the flat funding model, considering that in the event that scores are tied in this model, the first tier of a tiebreaker would be to look at which council districts do not have any representation for Thrive projects within this cycle, and using that mechanism to prioritize underrepresented districts. And then the second tier be to rescore, potentially using, I guess, asking staff to review and kind of rescore if necessary after the first tier. That was a lot, but.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I do agree with your concern about no data. And I mean, if we could priority funding for no representation, or under, if it's both, maybe no is considered first and but I do think your point made sense.
Thank you. It's just on the policy, and we want to make sure, that we are handling everything, that we can make sure that's addressed with care and moving forward. So, thank you. Okay, on this, we'd like to take a roll call vote. So, or Tessa, you've got something.
Commissioner Harden, your motion clarified the flat fee and how it would be addressed if there were ties. Did your motion also mean to adapt the other recommendations?
Should I start over, or I'd like to amend my motion?
Let's amend the motion.
I would like to amend my motion to include the additional recommendations recommended from this morning's grants meeting, as presented here at today's meeting. And that includes some of the concerns specifically about not funding murals, and then I guess specifically about the auditing as well. I don't want to read them all out, but I can if necessary.
So the motion is everything you stated regarding rank ordering if there's a tie, and the adoption of the other criteria pushed forward by the committee.
Correct.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I second.
Second amendment. Can we vote on the amendment? And then we'll vote on the motion.
First, we need to vote on the amendment. Roll call vote? Or can it just be?
I think ayes are fine to
I think
vote
so,
on the amendment.
yes. So for the amendment vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All against? Hearing none, amendment passes. Moving on to the motion on the table. Roll call vote there.
Ready? West,
Yes.
Harding,
Yes.
Lefkowitz,
Yes.
Brown, McCoy,
Yes.
Jester,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
Knight, Kurtz, Dupree Love, Nichols Phillips, Rosenblum,
Yes.
Wade, Watts, you. 9, pass.
Motion passes. Thanks, everyone. Okay, moving right into guidelines review and consideration. How I'd like to do this, if we can, is get the opinion from committee. And is that up? My apologies. My vision's a little off. I've migraine.
I concur with Dr. Coleman's statement. Based on the recommendation that came out of the committee and what was just passed, it appears that that motion considered both the criteria and the guidelines that were presented by staff.
Okay. So really we're back to, well, actually panelists. If we can then move into C, panelist criteria for review and consideration, then we will circle back up to the top for allocations. Commissioner Wright. Will we still have quorum with 8? Yes, we will, because it's 15.
And for any vote to pass, it will have to be unanimous.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Wade.
Panelist criteria basically are the same as before, and the differences are that they are going to be paid $350, that they have to do a conflict of interest statement, and instead of having 4 weeks off-site to grade, they will have 2 days for each category. So 2 days for Thrive, 2 days for operating, and it will be in person.
Thank you. Commissioner Harden?
Do you know how many panelists there will be, or ideally?
We were looking at 35. It depends on a lot of factors that we can't determine at this moment. Now that we have the criteria, we can do the technical review. We'll know a lot more.
Okay. And do you have a list of people already in the queue?
We have some people who have been identified, and we would obviously do a call.
Okay.
Now that assuming things get approved, we can start that immediately.
Okay.
Is there any, on the grants committee, I think that you're the one left. Is there any other information from grants committee about panelists?
No, just that we recommended to approve.
Okay. Commissioner McCoy, did you have a question?
No, I'm on the grants
Second.
committee.
Thank you.
So I make a motion that we adopt the staff recommendation for panelist criteria.
Second.
Any discussion?
Do you mind repeating that motion, please?
Sure. I make a motion that we adopt the staff recommendation for grant panelist criteria. Got my mix all spaced up there the second time.
Thank you.
And Commissioner McCoy, second. Yeah. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against?
Roll call. No? Okay.
Motion carries. The panelist criteria has been approved. Tessa, to be clear and to keep me on track, are we back to the top at allocation instead of new and old business?
Correct. You
Yes.
defer the allocation to the.
So I'd like to go back and move from the allocation of funds, recommendation, review, and consideration. Can we get that slide up, please? So now that we've worked through this and considering why we moved the allocation to the end of the agenda versus at the top, are there questions that now would change the allocation, the proposed allocation between Thrive and general operating after we have sorted through this?
Why not? Both as a show of good faith that we are committed to Thrive And as one more stopgap to make sure that we have appropriate funding for Thrive, why don't we move it to $1 million instead of 900,000? Let's talk about it anyway.
Up for discussion?
I also was going to propose an increase to 60/40, which would be approximately $1.3 million. But to your point, an increase.
Well, and not for nothing, an increase to 60/40 at 1.3 falls right between the two numbers that we talked about at 75 and 60, depending on who's able to come back with eligible applications.
Did you mean 75 and 30?
No, the math that we did when we took the applications that are there for Thrive and dropped the top amount to $10,000. If 75% of those applicants were eligible, it was 1.4 and some change. That was the total ask. And if 60% were eligible, it was just under 1.2. That was the total ask. So my point was just that if we discussed the 60/40 recommendation, which is an increase to 1.3, it falls right between those two hypothetical amounts that could be total asks depending on number of eligible applications for Thrive.
I also think that the increase in the number of Thrive applicants is greater than the percentage increase of operating. So adjusting it that way, I also think as a sign of, to your point, you said it better. What did you say? Goodwill, good faith. I like that. And then thinking about really trying to, seed these kind of more grassroots ways of thinking. And is it going to be perfect? No, but we start that place.
With that, also, I guess my only thing would be how does that in turn affect the operating, but going with the funding scenario and being on a sliding scale, then
It's all scalable.
It's all scalable.
That was why that model worked, is
Right.
that you could scale it. In fact, on the spreadsheet, it already ran the numbers for 50, 4, 6. I ran the scenario, so you can see it what it would be. So I'll just make a substitute motion, maybe, for one.
Tessa?
There's been no motion.
There's not a
Okay,
motion
there's
on the
not a
table yet.
motion. That's not a motion. I'll just make a motion. I'll make a motion to allocate my maths, $1.3 million to Thrive. Where's my little spreadsheet? And $1.3 million to Thrive. It's 1.305280. Okay, that's 40%. And then for operating, 60% is 1.957920. That's the maths. That it represents a 60/40 split for this fiscal year only. That's all we're approving is for this year.
Discussion on that? We need a second. I'll second. Any discussion?
If we're going to,
Commissioner, you.
I have a question. Just for clarification, I see here the other allocation model with 50/50. Why we don't take that too? So we avoid why here more, why there more, and then in this case, we can settle all the issues with artists and organizations. That is a question.
I totally hear your question, and then I'm still thinking if we're at that truncated timeline of March to June or so, spending the excess funds,
We're about to
Are we
lose
counting?
quorum. We're about to lose quorum.
we're about to lose quorum.
There's a motion.
There's a motion on the floor. And it's been seconded. Commissioner McCoy, do you have 2 minutes to finish this vote?
If it's 2 minutes.
Let's do it.
So you're,
It's 1 point, my motion is 60/40, $1.3 million.
looking around.
Knowing that we will, that this is just.
Just for
right.
clarification, are you calling for 60-40% or for the exact numbers for this motion?
That's what
The motion was, I believe you stated 60-40 and then stated the exact dollars.
Yeah.
That is the motion.
Yes.
That's what I say. 60/40 exact dollars.
Call the question.
Call the question.
Second, call a question.
Yeah. Let's take a roll call.
Let's take a vote.
Take a vote on call the question.
And call the question.
You mean a roll call?
Roll call for call the question.
Call the question, vote, hands up for yes. Call the question. 1, 2, 3. Call the question, passes, immediately vote on the motion.
Roll call, please.
West,
Yes.
Jester,
Yes.
Hardin,
Yes.
Lefkowitz,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
Rosenblum,
Yes.
McCoy,
Yes.
you.
I was abstaining.
Then the motion fails.
Motion fails.
Before, may I, Madam Chair, just
Yeah. Commissioner, you, sorry.
for clarification, before I abstain. So the, I'm sorry. Clarification, so
Since we don't have quorum,
Voted, we don't have a quorum.
we don't have quorum, and so we can no longer deliberate or discuss. Tessa, am I allowed to discuss if we need to call another meeting, specially called meeting for the allocation? Since we,
Really, we don't have quorum, no commission
can't.
business should be
no,
conducted.
we can't. Okay, y'all.
So we're stuck. How do we move forward?
I need a motion to adjourn, not even a motion to adjourn, we're just done.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.